Where was I? What was I doing?
You're introducing yourself.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. So the other the other thing is, until my cardiologist clears me, I'm not allowed to have my ADHD meds. So literally, the squirrels are everywhere right now. So I apologize in advance. Anyway, I started working for the Department of Children and Families after having been a foster parent for a number of years, and being that foster parent that continually kept her foot in the back of the system, trying to push it forward to do better and be better. And so I sent an email to the secretary at the time, about a little over 5 years ago now, and said, hey, y'all have been fighting me for 7 years. I win virtually every time. Let me come inside and fix it from the inside. And I never in a million years expected him to take take that suggestion. But about 2 weeks later, he sent me the position description, and my husband was like, now you got to put your money where your mouth is. I was like, oops. So I came on with the department, and I've been there now for a little over 5 years, and it's definitely been a ride. Our kiddos, the two youngest, when they were placed with us, we got middle kiddo the first time when he was 4 days old. He stayed with us for about a weekend, maybe 4 days, and was reunified. And then we got him back again when he was 6 weeks old. And that was kind of a permanent placement at that point in time. We didn't adopt him until he was close to 18 months old, but anybody who's dealt with the system understands that roller coaster. And then he was about 2, maybe 3 months old when case manager told us that mom was pregnant again, and asked us if they ended up sheltering that baby, would we consider taking it? And of course, I have very strong feelings about siblings and not separating siblings, so said yes. My husband was a little more reserved, but I win because I'm, me. And so we ended up with both of them. We started noticing very early on that there were some definite differences with development with Liam. By the 3-month mark, he was not able to come to the midline, let alone cross it. And so we got referred to early steps, and that was kind of the first step in learning about fetal alcohol, because I reached out to the biological grandmother and developed a relationship with her. And she was the one who actually told me that mom drank pretty heavily and smoked and engaged in street drugs and some other things. And so I had started doing a little bit of research. And then we ended up going, I think when he was about 2, to a geneticist here in town, who would not give us the full fetal alcohol diagnosis, but would give us the alcohol-related neurological deficiencies, or whatever it's called, the ARND diagnosis. But nobody had ever given us any of the education component. So anything that I knew was going, I was learning from going on the NoFAS website, reaching out to researchers who were working in that field, and trying to do my own reading and figuring out, what it was that we were dealing with. We were fortunate in that about 4 years ago, we engaged with a therapy provider here in town that is, oh my gosh, they're phenomenal, y'all. I wish I could replicate them in every community in the state, because they've been our lifeline. And then about 2 years ago, about 3 years ago, really, is when I reached out to Tamara, and we started having discussions about FAS, because she was coming up to do a training here in Tallahassee for some of the psychologists here in town. And then I had met Catherine at one of the DCF summits a couple of years prior. And so I started putting 2 and 2 together. And Tamara was like, well, you really need to come to the center. And I was like, oh, okay, fine, we'll do it. 100% convinced it was just going to be another one of those things in the litany of things that we do when attached to dependency that we're going to have absolutely no benefit. And I was very pleasantly surprised. And so after we got the report from the center, and we ended up moving schools, I found so much value in that information, because it really helps arm me for how to advocate for my kiddos. So I've now wrapped a lot of that into what I do in supporting families when they come to me through the department. So the title of this training was, how can DCF help, and how to survive until the cavalry comes. I'm going to go ahead and throw a spoiler out here. And I know that Tammy recording this, and my boss is going to see this, so you did not say this, but DCF is not the cavalry. I know that's a big shocker for everybody on the call, but it is not the cavalry because it's not a fast agency, and the response that comes from the agency is not fast either. But for those of you guys who have adopted your kiddos out of state care, particularly out of Florida state care, you actually have the ability to tap into post-adoption supports. And depending on where you live in the state, those post-adoption supports may be robust, but in a lot of areas of the state, they're virtually non-existent. And it's not the fault of DCF that they're non-existent, it's that there's just not a lot of providers who are well-versed in how to handle our types of kiddos. For those of you guys who have not adopted, and these are either your biological kiddos or you're taking care of kiddos from another family member, but you've not actually gone through the adoption process through DCF, you can still tap into support from DCF, what support is available, but it's not going through post-adoption support. So I'm actually going to talk in kind of two different streams here. I'll do the post-adoption piece of it first, and then I'll switch over to the non-post-adoption piece. So when you've adopted out of Florida DCF, and you have a need for support after you've finalized your adoption, your post-adoption services are those services that are run through the local community-based care entity that was responsible for your adoption finalization. So what that means is if you live in, like I do, I live in Leon County, Tallahassee, Florida, the community-based care lead agency in our area is Northwest Florida Health Network. But let's say my kiddo actually came to me from Miami and I adopted my kiddo through Miami. The post-adoption support for folks that I would reach out to first would be those folks that are in the Miami community-based care lead agency, which is the Citrus Health Network. And then what they would do is they would work on putting together whatever supports or services that I need using their network, which obviously, since I live in Leon County, would not be very helpful because it's not going to be in my best interest or my kid's best interest to drive 7 hours to go do a therapeutic service, right? So they would then reach out to Northwest Florida Health Network up here and work with them to identify whatever local supports and services might be available here. But the funding is driven through that local community-based care entity that was responsible for the adoption. So that's where you'll probably stumble on a lot of things, is that if you live in a different community than the community where the adoption was out of, they have to kind of figure out a way to knit together supports, and that can get cumbersome. Every community-based care agency has a post-adoption case manager, and the families are supposed to reach out to that case manager. If you don't know who that case manager is, you can do one of a couple of things. You can either connect with them by calling the Adoption Information Center, which is very similar to our Foster Information Center and our statewide abuse hotline. The number for that is 1-800-96-ADOPT. And they would be able to tell you who the community-based care lead agency is for that area. And they would also be able to get you in touch with your post-adoption case manager, theoretically. And then you would make that phone call out to that case manager and start the discussion as to what you need. So when you're dealing with the post-adoption folks, again, these are generally folks who probably don't have a lot of expertise in fetal alcohol syndrome itself. They are typically, case managers, like the run-of-the-mill case managers who are, usually used to handling our kiddos on the front end, but they may not be well versed in the back end needs. So it might not. You make that phone call and it might not be that a support or a service is put into place immediately, because a lot of times they don't understand the kind of fire that our families are living under. And again, no fault of their own, really. nobody understands this life until they live it. I think that's my own personal take. For those of you guys who are not tapping into post-adoption services, but may need some sort of help from somebody because maybe your kiddo's got some needs that you can't meet through your own health insurance, or you've exceeded your benefit, or for a variety of reasons, you just don't have the resource or the support in your own lane to be able to support, you can actually reach out to the hotline. You're not reporting yourself for abuse, abandonment, or neglect. But what you are doing is you're calling to put in what's called a parent needs assistance request. With a parent needs assistance request, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, my kiddo is not being abused, abandoned, or neglected. They're not really at risk of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, but we, for whatever reason, whatever's going on in our circumstance, we are not able to meet the needs of our kiddo effectively, and we need a little bit more help. So what happens with that is the hotline takes that call in and they send it out to the community-based care lead agency as a call for help. And they assign somebody to reach out to the family to try and figure out what the circumstances are around that family and how to design a support or a service to effectively keep that family in prevention mode, as opposed to, okay, nothing's happened, you haven't had anything come in, and you still are unable to meet the needs of your kiddo. And now the temperature of the environment has risen to a point to where somebody is at risk of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, or, you have other kids in the home who are, now being impacted in a negative way. So it's in the department's best interest, and it's in the family's best interest for us to reach in prior to getting to that point and help calm things down so that we can prevent entry into the system, or re-entry in some cases into the system through prevention services. The caveat on all of that, and anybody who's ever had to reach out to all of this stuff is familiar with it, it's not fast. It's very similar to what happens in dependency cases. It takes a while to figure out what the actual need is and what the best way to support that need is. So the bigger part of what I was going to present today is actually how to stay afloat, how to keep your family intact, how to keep your sanity intact, how not to end up on the liver transplant list, like I may eventually end up being, and all of that stuff. So these are really the tips and tricks from somebody with lived experience. And I think the number one thing here that tends to help most of our families the most, and you're going to laugh at this part, hopefully you'll laugh at this part, is it's really the sense of humor. We're all living in a completely absurd situation. I mean, who in their right mind would have ever thought that this is what life is going to look like for us, right? None of us stepped into this space expecting how explosive and difficult this life can be on occasion. But if you can kind of step back from it, and instead of letting it drive your anxiety and letting it drive the fear and the anger, and just look at it from the absurd angle that it truly is, and try and bring that humor into it, it actually does something in your own fight, flight, or freeze response, where it helps kind of eliminate a little bit of those stress hormones that are in your own body, and allows you to stay more connected to the executive functioning portion of your brain, where you can drive better decision-making skills, and you can kind of keep yourself afloat a little bit longer. So that's the first thing. When families come to me and they're like super, super, super stressed out, before I get off the phone with them, I always tell them, your homework for tonight, I want you to find the most absurd comedy movie or film or comedian or something. I want you to spend at least 30 minutes watching something that's just going to make you laugh until you cry, because that's going to help your entire outlook on things. I promise, as absurd as it sounds, it really is important. The next thing is creating a sense of community for yourself. So this group is one piece of that. I know in my own life, I have 7 other moms who are all foster and adoptive moms too. All of us are raising at least one kiddo on the FAS spectrum. And we call ourselves the mafia. We're the Winnie the Pooh mafia because we're cute and cuddly, but we'll also cut you. But having that sense of community, that group of people who understand what you're living through, to be able to tap into and talk with, it not only helps you be able to talk through some things, but it may be that one of your friends has also gone through something similar to what you're going through and may be able to give you an idea of an avenue you haven't even thought of yet. So creating intentional connections with others who are doing this life as well, is really, really, really important. And, this group, we meet once a week and we have that opportunity to check in and really talk about what's going on in our lives and to support each other. But taking that a step further and having somebody that you have access to, basically 24/7, you've got to find your own little tribe. I think Jen Warden, it might've been you who mentioned something about tribe last night on one of my Facebook posts. It really is important to have those people that you can tap into that are non-judgmental, or even if they're judgmental of everybody but you and your family. Because my group, we're a little bit of a judgmental group. But having that group of people that you can tap into and just be able to say, you know what, today's been, I think somebody else earlier this morning called it, quote unquote, a shit show. And they understand it and they go, you know what? Yeah, it has been. How can we help you? What is it that you need? Do we need to go hide a body, or, do we need to come over and do some laundry? Something along those lines. That is an incredibly important thing. And then having that sense of community and connection with a grouping of friends allows you to have somebody who can help you tap into other places for community. So in your faith institution, if your faith institution has an outreach ministry that is supportive of families, you might suggest to that outreach that they do something to support families who have kiddos with high needs like this. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're developing a special needs nursery or anything like that, but maybe it's something where you've got a couple of different parishioners that you can tap into and say, hey, you know what, I've just really had a bad day. Can we go meet for coffee and sit 6 feet away and just, can I just spend time with another human? Because those touch points and connection points with other humans are super, super important, particularly when you get into those places in life where you start to feel really isolated because of what's going on. The next piece is advocacy. And we'll talk about advocacy in a longer training in another couple of weeks, I think. But really learning how to narrow your story down to what we call an elevator speech, where you can sum up very high level in 2 minutes to somebody, where it's you're walking down the street and you happen to run into Congressman Neil Dunn. Hey, Congressman, let me tell you about what's going on and why I need you to help us with X or Y or Z. And you can give that 2-minute speech. It's short enough to where you can get their attention, and then that invites them. That gives them the opportunity to then invite you in as a subject matter expert to help them drive policy. It's not only important to do that in the realm of legislation, but you need to be able to do that with the schools. You need to be able to do that when you're calling around looking for different therapy providers. You need to be able to do that when you're talking to people at your church. Okay, so why did have you ever gone to go pick your kid up from Sunday school, or you've gone to go pick your kid up from school, and you get that look from the teacher and you're like, oh, I know that look. Oh, what'd they do today? And they come and they go, Mrs. Rosenberg, we've noticed that Liam is doing, insert whatever it is that Liam is doing. How do we handle that? Being able to say, usually I do it in a comedic kind of way. I wish I had the answer to that. If I did, I'd have $1 million, because then I'd solve a bunch of other families' problems too. But here's what we try at home, and it seems to work some of the time. And here's what we've tried in other things. And I'm open to suggestions for you. But being willing to sit there and talk with people who may not understand this, and just give them that first peek into this life, oftentimes gives them an opportunity to then engage with us in a more meaningful manner. And it opens up some dialogue to really move the needle a little bit and create supports out of thin air. About 4 years ago, when we were really first getting into this, there was nothing up here in Tallahassee for any of this. There were no groups that were focusing on it. There were no therapy providers who had, a lot of expertise or experience with it, but we're starting to create that because we've got families up here now who are going in to different therapy providers and saying, this is what we're running into. Can I connect you with the Florida Center, or can I connect you with the Michigan folks, or can I connect you with No FAS? And let's talk about some of this and figure out how we need to approach this. And so just by being willing to step up and share part of your story, you're opening up potential connections with other folks. The next big piece, self-care. Self-care is critically important when you're dealing with high needs kiddos. And all of you guys know this. And all of you guys also know how hard it is to be able to step away for even an hour to go and do something on your own where you get to be just you for a minute. You're not mom with the black and white referee stripes on. You're not breaking up fights. You're not advocating for your kiddo. You're not fighting with your kiddo. And you have an hour of time that is 100% to you. You've got to be able to find those ways to do that. And so it might be that you have conversations with, the provider team that you do have in place and talk them into starting like some sort of a parent's night out or a parent's day out or a parent's break kind of thing. And that might be that you talk to your faith institution and maybe they take that on. Or with us up here in Tallahassee, the therapy provider actually developed a parents' night out specifically for our types of kiddos. And they use the therapists and the play coaches as the staff. So it's not just that you're dropping your kid off at some random preschool or daycare. These are actually trained professionals who understand how to handle the types of behaviors that may come out. And so when I drop my kids off there and I go run for an hour just to have a meal with my spouse, or when he's deployed to go sit at a bar and talk to a bartender while I'm having a meal, I'm not worried about them. I'm not worried about somebody calling me to say they can't handle the types of behaviors that they're seeing. And can I please come back very quickly and pick up my kiddo? But finding those ways, whether it's creating some agreement with other members of your family, or whether you have a mafia that you put together for yourself where you rotate through and one mom might take 2 or 3 of the kids, this week, and the next week it's this mom, and then the week after that it's the other. Being able to create those very intentional spaces and places for you to disconnect and focus solely on your own inner energy is super, super, super critically important. You've all heard the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, I can actually prove to you that you can, because mine's been empty for several years now, but I still find ways to pour out of it. But you have to find those places where that energy will come from other people to help keep you above water long enough. And then the other piece of it is sometimes you have to shut your brain down. I don't know if you guys do this or not, but the day that I got the diagnosis from the quote unquote official diagnosis from the Florida Center, we left the center and went and had dinner at the Columbia. And then ironically, I drank about a gallon of sangria and went and walked stupidly on the beach with a bar of chocolate screaming at the seagulls. And it was one of those things where instead of focusing on that immediate moment in time, in my brain, I had gone 15 years down the road and what it was going to look like if our kids didn't launch and if we had to live this for the rest of our days. You can't think that way all the time. It's okay to do it every now and then when you have to sit there and try and figure out what your long-term plan is going to be, but try not to go so far down the road that you eat yourself up with anxiety, thinking about what's going to happen 15 years from now, instead of, okay, what's my plan for this week? When you do that and you're able to focus more at what this next day is going to look like, or maybe even what this next hour is going to look like, it takes away that that stuff that's swirling around that you really have no control over, and it forces you then to focus on the task at hand and the things that you do have in that moment control over, and really being realistic about what you're going to do. So having an hour-to-hour plan or having a day-to-day or a weekly plan is great, because then you're trying to set up those consistent routines that you're going to do every day. And then when you've got a little bit of calm from that, then you can start focusing on what that long-term needs to look like. Recognizing that the developmental delays that our kiddos are going to experience impacts all of the domains. It impacts their fine motor skills, their gross motor skills, how their nervous system is wired, how they process language and sound, how they process all of the information that comes into their little bodies. And then recognizing different ways to try and interrupt some of those dysregulations is super important. So sitting down with an occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist or behavioral health in a silo is great. But if you can get them on board as a team and approach it from a team perspective, where you've got OT, PT, speech, and behavioral health all connected together, all working, looking at the whole child as opposed to just pieces of the child, and the whole child and how that child interacts with their environment, and looking at the environment not just as, you know, what happens at home, but how they interact with their environment at school, how they interact with their environment in your faith places, and how they interact in the larger environment, will help you really come together and put together a plan for, okay, when we start to see kiddos getting dysregulated in this way, this is how we're going to approach that. That means that you really have to educate yourself in ways that parents of neurotypical kiddos will never have to do. And it stinks that we have to do that, and that we have to become brain experts and vestibular system experts and proprioception experts and all of that stuff. But by understanding how all of those pieces work together, it creates an understanding for how to approach my child in their vulnerability and in their dysregulation. And then it also forces some introspection on you. By learning how their brains are responding to things, you'll start recognizing how your own brain is responding to things. I know for me personally, my middle kid and I struggle harder than my other two kids and I do, because there's just something about him that triggers me. And in trying to figure out how to support him in his dysregulation, I came to the conclusion that the reason why he triggers me as much as he does is the face that he makes reminds me very much of the face my stepdad used to make when he was getting angry. And so learning how to support Liam forced me to deal with something in my past, and has made it to where I can actually engage with him a little bit better. I think I had some other things on there, but like I said earlier, not having my ADHD stuff is really starting to impact me a little bit. So I may have missed a couple of things that I was thinking.
Heather, can you talk a little bit about just the additional adoption subsidies?
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot of families who don't know about that. And so, yeah, if you could talk about that.
So for those of you who adopted out of the state of Florida, when you adopted, likely your maintenance adoption subsidy, depending on how long ago you adopted, likely your adoption maintenance subsidy started at around $417 a month. That's the minimum that they start the negotiations at. But you can actually negotiate for a higher subsidy based on the needs of the child. One of the things that a lot of families have problems with is when they do reach out to post-adoption support to let them know that they want to do a maintenance adoption subsidy negotiation for post-adoption, is that they don't get a lot of really good information on what you need to provide in order to back up your request for additional subsidy. So what you're going to do when you do that, first off, when you make that request, go ahead and do that request in writing so that you start your paper trail. If you have that paper trail handy, it will come in handy down the road, I promise. So not only does when you submit that request, that's the day that the clock starts ticking. So if I were to put a request in right today for and say, I'd like to request an additional, I'm still here, sorry. That you would like to request an additional subsidy amount, then you don't have to provide all of your backup documentation today. You're putting your request on file today saying, this is what we need to do. I need you to tell me what you need. And then today is the day that it starts. So if I don't get all of my documentation in for another month or so, once it is finally approved, it retroacts back to today, to the date that you originally requested it. What you want to do when you are putting together your documentation is build your argument. They're going to look at, they're not going to put additional subsidy in place for anything that would be covered as a Medicaid billable service. So if you're saying your kiddo needs, needs more occupational therapy, that's not something that they're going to build in. They're not going to build in the dollars for occupational therapy because that's a service that is provided through the Medicaid program. But what you can say is, my kiddo is going to occupational therapy 5 days a week, and I'm having to take time off from work to travel back and forth. You can put down, you can mark, you can create, this is the time that it takes me to travel. This is the amount of miles. And so that would be something that could build in. If you've had conversations with your pediatrician and your pediatrician has recommended X or Y or Z support or service, you can build those in. So for example, when we went to go and renegotiate for Liam, one of the things that our pediatrician and the occupational therapist, the speech therapist and the behavioral therapist, everybody, the whole entire team recommended was equine therapy. They recommended that we, do intentional things to create supports and services where the kids had opportunities for adults to engage with them in modeling pro-social behavior. So the doctor actually said, things like scouts or things like organized sports or things like music or whatever would be things that would be beneficial in the long run. So when I put my request in, I built in, we're doing scouts, we're doing music lessons. So at the time we were doing piano and guitar. We're doing equine therapy, and then all the travel. We had been on the wait list for applied behavioral analysis services for, at that point in time, 2 years. We're coming up on the 3-year mark now. And, but we weren't able to get the services because I had called every single service provider that was on the ACA list, and they all had a wait list of at least 12 months. And so I ended up hiring somebody privately out of pocket. And so I was able to build that in and use the argument. Yes, it's a Medicaid billable service, but it's not currently available because there are wait lists for everybody. And then I had to go in and provide all the backup documentation to show that the wait lists were there. But so you go in and you build all of that stuff, and then you have your conversation with your pediatrician and with your therapy team, and you have them write a letter to, to support all of that. So when I built it out, I had a letter from our pediatrician that outlined what the diagnosis was, what the typical trajectory of most kiddos who are impacted by the diagnosis looks like, and what the research is showing are things that interrupt that typical trajectory and make the trajectory a better trajectory for that kiddo. And then we talked about also what secondary diagnoses come down the road when kiddos with these particular diagnoses are not well supported. So things like increased risk of suicide ideation, increased risk of depression or anxiety or all of that stuff. And so we built the narrative around, this is what we need here in this moment in order to provide these opportunities for our, give me 2 seconds, Claudia Jane, get back over here. Sorry, my dog just escaped. We built in all of the narrative around this is what we need here in this moment. And this is why we're doing that, to help prevent these long-term secondary diagnoses that may come down the road. And then I actually put together a spreadsheet and said, this is how many miles I travel, taking them to X, Y, and Z different things. This is what I'm currently paying for out of pocket. This is what's Medicaid reimbursable, but not accessible at this point in time because of network adequacy issues. This is what is not Medicaid reimbursable. And I was able to build an argument, and you can actually negotiate up to what the subsidy amount would be if your kiddo actually came into care that day. So once you put that packet together and you give it to the community-based care lead agency dealing with post-adoption support, they then go through and review that. And they look at, okay, if this kiddo were to come into care today, what setting would that kiddo be? Would they go into a traditional foster care setting? Would they go into a therapeutic setting? And if they're going into a therapeutic setting, is it therapeutic level 1, level 2, level 3? Would they have to go into a medical home? If they're going into a medical home, is it medical 1, 2, or 3? And so they would look at what the rate is for that, and you can negotiate up to that full rate. It takes forever to do it. Again, it's not the cavalry coming immediately. It's, sometimes it takes several months to get through this. But by starting that with that first email and saying, we want to negotiate for a higher adoption subsidy, when it does finally get approved, it does retroact back to the date of that. So when we did ours 2 years ago, I started the process on July 1st and was able to get it approved in October of that year. And when they approved it, the first payment was actually retroactive back to July 1st. Is that what you wanted me to go over, Tamara?
Yeah, and just to kind of go over, because I know I talked to you and there's been a couple of other families, and I've kind of created a little bit of a sample template based on getting your information and the other parents' information. The amount of additional funds is significant, correct?
It can be, but again, it all goes back to when they evaluate, you have to have the backup documentation there to prove the need. And they're going to look at what would that child have to, what placement would that child go into if they were taken into care that day. So, if when we had started ours, when they were looking at Liam, if Liam had come into care that day, he would have gone in as a therapeutic level 3. And so we could negotiate up to that full amount. I didn't negotiate up to that full amount. I got the thing, I only took what I needed in that moment to support him, thinking that if we down the road do have to come back for a second bite at the apple, we can always do it later on down the road. But I was only interested in covering what the need was right here and there, even though we could have gone higher.
Okay, 2 questions. One, just to finish up this. And then there was a couple of questions. Do you know of a place where, so for parents that are knowing what to ask, like, do you know is there a place online to see where like level 1, 2, 3, like those, like how much each of those costs?
They're yes and no. You can go out to the Medicaid schedule and look up what therapeutic foster care rates are. You kind of have to Google around to find it. You can also go out to the Medicaid schedule to find out what the medical reimbursement rates are. But the best source of information or the best place to get that information is actually asking your post-adoption person, hey, what is it that we need to be doing? What backup documentation do you guys require to be able to illustrate that this is what we need? And it's more based on, being able to build in. You can't just come in and say, okay, well, my kiddo would qualify for $2,200 a month in reimbursement. That's what I'm going to request. You have to build your request to prove that the $2,200 is necessary. So even though Liam would have qualified in as therapeutic level 3, all I needed was this amount over here to support the things that we currently were trying to maintain. And so that's the only thing that I could prove up to. I mean, I probably could have come up with ways to get there, but to me, that wasn't appropriate. I just needed to get to what it was that we actually needed the support for. But having those discussions with the post-adoption team, they should be able to get that for you.
So there's been a couple of questions: out-of-state adoptions, international adoptions. Brandy had asked, adopted out of state, but not through state agency. Can you help?
Okay, let me see here. We have post-adoption support in Wisconsin as well. They're not a part of DCF. It is a different entity in Wisconsin. Yeah, so post-adoption support when you adopted outside of the state of Florida will go back to your state of origin. And I don't know anything about the other 49 states or any of the other territories. You would actually have to go back into that state and figure out what their processes are. Let's see.
So like in Ohio, so like I'm thinking of Jen Keller. She adopted in Ohio, and she would have to find the post-adoption specialist there.
If they have post-adoption, some states don't have post-adoption supports in place. There's another organization called the North American Council on Adoptable Children, NACAC. I believe their website is nacac.org, and Joe is the dad. Josh Kroll, one of my real good friends. Josh does a lot of the post-adoption stuff throughout the rest of the country. He would be a pretty good resource to at least reach out to find out questions for other states. I can get his contact information and send that along to you, Tamara, so we can get it out to the group. But tapping into NACAC when you have questions about subsidy, or when you have questions about post-adoption support, or when you have questions about, funding flowing across state lines, that's a good place to start.
And Crystal had asked about how this would affect kids that are turning 18 but still require extra care and cannot live on their own.
So that's an interesting question. So in the state of Florida, a couple of years ago, we actually did an enhancement to post-adoption supports for kiddos who were being adopted after they had turned 16. So now you can actually have enhanced support that flows through all the way up until they're 21, 22 with a documented disability, but that it's not retroactive. So if you adopted prior to that and your kiddo was not 16 at the time or any of that stuff, it doesn't go retroactive back to those families. That only impacts families who in the last 2 years have adopted a kiddo who was already 16, and then they opted into the enhanced maintenance and post-adoption support stuff. So when you've got kiddos who are going to struggle after 18, at that point in time, I think the process is going to end up having to be either looking at going the disability route, either through Social Security. I know fetal alcohol syndrome in and of itself is not a qualifying diagnosis for the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. But if you can show that your kiddo had a cerebral palsy, which is, a brain injury present at birth. So depending on how your pediatrician classifies it, if they classify it as cerebral palsy, you might be able to do an APD application, which would then theoretically provide support post 18. But you'd have to be able to prove that it was a circumstance that occurred prior to them turning 18. But there are only 6 diagnoses that qualify somebody for APD: cerebral palsy, Prader-Willi, autism, but it has to be profound autism,
intellectual disability.
ability, but that's the IDD. You're looking at an IQ of below 70. And then there's a new one that just came out, and it's kiddos at risk of developmental delay who are between the ages of 3 and 5. So if you've got a very young kiddo, I think Brandy, was it you who has your granddaughter who's 2.5? No, that was somebody else. Yeah. So if you've got a kiddo who is very young, go ahead and do the application now. Again, APD is not, they're not a crisis agency either. If you put an application in now, you might not get services for another 10 years, but it puts you on that wait list. And every now and then, I know twice in the last 15 years, they've done a clear the list where they've come up with some extra money and they were able to take everybody that was on the list and get them onto the waiver right then and there. So at least having the application in gets you on that wait list. And so there is always that possibility.
So let me get this straight, because there's a lot of kids that come through clinic 3 to 5 years old with a developmental delay.
Mm-hmm. Do the application.
How are we defining a developmental delay? I mean,
APD is not my agency, so I don't know. I just know that that is one of the qualifying things on there. But the application isn't terribly difficult to do. Going through, it's like a 2 to 3 page application, and you do have to provide some backup documentation, but it is worthwhile to do it, because if you do get waitlisted, if you get put on the wait list at some point in time, a decade later, your kiddo will come off that wait list and they will get the iBudget money to be able to then use for APD eligible services. So that could be, it could be respite care. It could be, in-home services. It could be day services. It could be PAM. It stands for the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. There's a lot of different supports and services that you can tap into through the APD system. If you do get waitlisted and you do come off. Now, I will also say this for those of you who have kiddos that are pending adoption. If they are APD eligible, do the APD application prior to finalizing your adoption, because if you do that APD application and then you go to finalization, they immediately come off the wait list and immediately go on to the iBudget. So it takes 10 years off of your wait. So for those of you who are in the process of it, go ahead and get that application in now, so that when you do get to finalization, it immediately takes you off the wait list.
Pam had asked about international adoption. Does this
okay, let me see. Let me go back into the chat. What about international adoption?
Can she get any money from this?
Yeah, I think the way I understand it, we're just on our own, right? Yes, we adopted internationally. There's nothing.
Yeah, it's not even that it's international. If you do a private adoption, none of this attaches. Private adoptions are adoptions that are done outside of a governmental system, and are done through private agencies. And as such, it's, even when you adopt out of DCF, when you get the birth certificate, it changes mom and dad to you. So it looks as if you have just pushed that kid out yourself. It's exactly like that in a private adoption. It is exactly as if you push that kiddo out yourself. And so you're on your own as far as any post-adoption type support. But that doesn't mean that you can't then, if your kid qualifies for APD, or if your kid qualifies for prevention services through DCF or some other entity, it doesn't mean that you can't tap into those. You're just not tapping into it from a post-adoption perspective.
Question, APD, is it, Ann was asking, that's not only in Florida, it's all over the states.
Well, APD is a Florida entity, but there may be APD-like entities in other states. Same thing with DCF. DCF is a Florida entity, but every state and territory has a DCF-like entity.
Mm-hmm.
And each state is going to be different. Whoever it was who talked about ICPC being a crazy thing. Yes, it's a 4-letter word for a reason. But ICPC is basically a compact between all of the 50 states and territories knitting together how child welfare will work when you're crossing state or territory lines, because each of the 50 states and territories sets up their own child welfare services according to their rules and regulations. And so the ICPC compact is really just a mechanism for those states to be able to communicate back and forth what their needs are with each other. It's an agreement that they've come up with that they all hold each other accountable to. So if you're adopting out of Oregon from the state of Florida, it sets up what the rules are between Oregon and Florida, or, you know, Hawaii and Oregon, or, you know, DC and Georgia. It's just a mechanism of communication between the two states.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Does anyone have some additional questions for Heather to take advantage? I saw lots of shaking heads. Elizabeth's asking, how do we apply for APD? The agency I had to apply, the agency I had to apply on my own because it would, how do we apply for APD?
Okay, so it's the same thing as like applying for Social Security or any of the other stuff. You have to go out to their website and figure out what their application process is. So if you go into Google or any other search engine and search Florida Agency for Persons with Disabilities, it'll take you to the website. You just kind of have to mouse around until you find that application sheet. A little bit later, when we get off of this, I'll go in and see if I can't put together some, you know, pointers on here's the website, here's where you go, kind of thing. I can't really walk you through the processing of it because I haven't made it all the way through yet myself. But it is out there. But so you've got for those kiddos who are getting ready to turn 18, you've got things that you can look at, like, you know, depending on their ability to advocate for themselves, or, you know, how impacted they are, you may look into guardianship, or having, you know, guardianship appointed so that you have some control over them once they turn 18, because once they turn 18, you no longer have access to their medical providers or records or to determine anything. They are self-determinate at that point. If they're not able to be there, if you set up guardianship prior to them turning 18, it is so much easier than trying to do it once they have turned 18. So that's to look into. Applying to the Agency for Persons with Disabilities if they have one of those qualifying diagnoses.
Can I cut you off? I have a question for you. So we know if, you know, even I'm just thinking of Crystal's child who's older and probably qualifies for ADP, but then the wait list is so long. Would you recommend her calling like DCF to say, like, I need help? Because would that because at least from what I'm experienced being on these meetings, it seems like they're on it to get, I don't know if they're on it to get her on these children on the wait list, or they're getting the services with APD.
So what happens when you have a kiddo who's APD eligible, who then comes on the radar of the Department of Children and Families? There is a mechanism to jump the line, so to speak, and it's called crisis. So if a kiddo is at risk of losing their placement or whatever, they can actually pull them off the wait list and get them onto the iBudget service right then. That's why if they're APD eligible and you're in the process of adoption, get the APD application done first, because the permanency move is the thing that takes them off of the wait list. It's kind of the same thing. If they're at risk of going into care, then they can take them off the wait list. But those are APD processes that I'm not well versed on. I know they exist, but I haven't gotten entirely there yet.
Okay, so just, you may not have the answer. So still going back to the Crystal situation, has an intellectual disability. His IQ is 69 with autism.
Oh, okay.
He has big behaviors, but how old is he, Crystal?
She is 18, and she was adopted as, she was not even 2 years old yet when she was adopted, but she's 18 now, and she got her diagnoses only weeks before she turned 18. So she's like kind of flown under the radar all this time. She struggled. She wasn't able to finish high school, then struggled with her GED. And because of bipolar and things like that, she has a therapist, and she sent us to have a full evaluation done, because she kept telling me that she had autism, and I kept saying, no, she's alcohol exposed, but she's not autistic. And when they sent us for the workup, they tested her out as autistic and having an intellectual disability. So all these years, her entire school experience, she went through IEP meetings and ESC, but it just wasn't caught until just before she turned 18.
So it happened before she turned 18, so you can still do the application to APD. But now that she's over 18, she's going to end up being on the wait list for a while.
Okay.
With the autism diagnosis and the intellectual disability, you may also want to apply for Social Security disability.
Yes, and we have done that. We're waiting to hear back on that.
And since she is over the age of 18, do you have guardianship?
No.
You probably want to go ahead and talk to a family law attorney about that process too.
Yeah.
That will be helpful in the long run. Because right now, the fact that she's 18 and self-determinant, you don't have the ability to make decisions for her.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we have just 5 more minutes, and I always do still like to end with a mindful moment. Does anyone have any last questions? We'll have Heather. Pam does.
Just
Yeah.
real quick.
I need to get Heather's contact information. Can you email that to me so that we can talk about this issue I've got with ICPC in Tallahassee and how I get around it.
Contact information,
Okay,
and Heather will give the resources. You'll send me the resources, Heather. Okay. Yeah. Pam had a question.
So APD is different than Social Security disability.
Yeah. Social Security disability is a federal program. APD is a state program.
All right. Thank you.
The other thing that I'm just going to kind of throw out there for everybody, if your kiddos are not already engaged with occupational therapy or speech therapy, those two at a minimum are ones that I highly, highly, highly recommend. I know most of us think about OT as being a rehab type thing, but it is absolutely not. It is a transformative service for kiddos who have neurologic issues and processing issues going on. And if you work very closely with your OT, they can a lot of times teach you some things that will help you prevent the dysregulation or disrupt the dysregulation in your home environment. And SLP is another really, really, really big one for our kiddos, because a lot of times our kiddos don't process language the same way a neurotypical or typically developing peer would. And so being able to understand how they're processing the information that's coming into them helps you also then tailor how you feed them information or how you set up your environment to minimize disruption. In our home, I even had to go in and paint walls because, we were told, for our one kiddo who's an avoider, a sensory avoider, you don't want lots of bright, distracting colors. And then with our other two who are sensory seekers, we had to go in and actually make their rooms brighter because that would be something that would help build in. And you would never think that wall color would actually play a big role in regulation, but it absolutely does. And so in my one kid's room, there's very little stuff on the wall and everything is muted, but in my other two kids, there's lots of stuff for them to look at. And even in setting up our backyard, we've got the ninja course, we've got the tree climbing, the trampoline, all sorts of things like that all help disrupt that that sense of dysregulation that they start to feel. And so we've been able to actually calm our home environment down to the point to where we're not on fire anymore. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we were that family that was at risk of disruption or dissolution of an adoption. And now we're thriving. I mean, it's chaos and have a very dark sense of humor. I probably drink a little too much, but it works, and we're doing relatively well now. So
now, would we set that up through the school, or do we just go direct?
No, go direct. So Florida is a direct access state. So regardless of whether you have Medicaid or whether you have private insurance, you don't need your pediatrician to refer you. You can reach out to the specialties on your own, and they'll do the evaluation, but then they have to get the pediatrician to sign off on it. So when they go through and they do the evaluation and they say, oh, your kiddo needs X or Y or Z plan of care, they'll send it to the pediatrician. Pediatrician will sign off on it, and then you get services in place. But the difference between school-based and private-based is a world of difference. School-based therapy is 100% focused on allowing that kiddo to access the educational environment. So they're not working at a global level, they're working solely on skills that will help them in the classroom. Private-based therapy focuses on the global skills that a kid needs to interact with their entire environment. And so is looking at the whole child as opposed to a slice of the child that's only in the school setting from 8 to 3.
Well, Heather, thank you so much for coming. I'm sure, well, I've recorded this, so I'm actually going to send this out to the group. And now I might even send this, make sure that anyone that goes through clinic sees this as well, especially those 3 to 5 year olds. Now I'm like horrified that I could have been getting them connected really easily right away. So,
to know. I mean, there's so much to know and so many different avenues to pursue. How do you know which ones are the right one until you've gone down the wrong path enough times, you know?
Yeah, no, this was really helpful. And just so you guys all know, so this Friday we have our advocacy meeting, and then next month, which is, you know, it's the 4th Friday of every month. So then next month, Heather is going to be presenting again. But this month, definitely come. There's lots of things moving and a shaking going on in Florida and nationally. So if you, I don't know if I have everyone I'm sending it out to. I'm usually just sending, I'll send it out to you guys as well. Sorry, Jen, Lynn, you're Washington, you're Wisconsin. But if you guys can make it, that would be great. The more, as I say, the better. And I have two questions. Well, and I have set up for a couple of other people to present coming in the months to come. One, I'm going to have a lawyer, an educational lawyer, come in just to talk about school rights from a legal standpoint. She's going to be able to present. So I'm setting that up. And then I'm also going to have one of our neuropsychologists come in, so that if anyone's ever had an evaluation and you still don't remember or understand what it means, I was thinking of having somebody come in just to kind of explain that as well. And if there are other topics you guys want, let me know and I'll try to see if I can find something. And then my one last thing before we go, I had a request. So going back to the CAT team in Centerstone, they're wanting to start a support group. They have an intern and she was interested in observing this group. Would you guys mind if she came to observe this group once? Does anyone?
I wouldn't mind.
Okay. I mean, I figure this is a way she'll do confidentiality, but this is also a way for more people to really understand about FASD. So I always like to have people come in. So I just wanted to make sure to let her know that to talk with you guys first. All right. So thanks again. We're not going to do our mindful moment because we're past our time. And for those that will be there on Friday, I will see you on Friday.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather.